Every now and again on my show, especially the Voyager stuff, I have to basically cross out notes. I put that in quotes because I don't cross it out. I just remember and I don't take a note on it. But what I mean by that is I go over something that I've basically already covered. Something that I don't really feel the need to repeat because I've already covered it. I mean, this makes sense, right? You don't want every single episode to be about how blah, 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 right? You don't want every single episode for me to completely reiterate things I've already talked about in previous episodes. That just would make sense, would it not? So, given that, there's several reasons why that tends to come up. Sometimes it comes up because there's something that, I don't want to talk about for political reasons. It violates my own controversy rule. Sometimes something comes up and I don't want to talk about it because it will be better to talk about it later. That's happened a few times. But again, the most common reason why is because I've already talked about it, because I've already covered a topic. And in a very few rare cases, we have a situation where not only do I not want to talk about it because I already have, I've already talked about the fact that we've already talked about it. This is a Doctor episode. Now, I like the Doctor as a character. He's probably one of my favorite characters. There's kind of a pile up at the top three or so for my favorite characters in Voyager, and the Doctor is one of those three. And I like the Doctor, and I like Robert Picardo. He's a great actor. He's a great singer. And if you want an episode of just listening to Robert Picardo really stretching his chops and really singing well, this is a good episode for you. He does a lot of operatic stuff, and something really simple and basic, actually. He does a song whose name I don't actually remember. Off the top of my head, I just lost. Sorry, I'm still recovering from Gen Con. I'm absolutely exhausted. You can see I haven't even shaved lately. Haven't even taken the time. I've been working on the railroad all the live long day. I've been working on the railroad just to pass the time away. That song, right? That's actually significant, I think, because that's not the most simple song in the world, but it is a very, very simple song. A child who has no great understanding of musical cadence or any of the math or convolutions that go into musical composition or the singing thereof could still probably sing that song and do a pretty good job of it. I mean, no offense to people who really try to put in a good job of it, and indeed Robert Picardo does a pretty good job of that song, but it's a very simple musical composition, and that's important. But if all you're wanting to watch in this episode is Robert Picardo sing, then you're good. If you want some interesting character dynamics, character growth, a new arc, anything else intellectually engaging, you need to go somewhere else. Let me tell you a little story. This is true. I don't 100% remember all episodes that I've watched before. This goes not just for Voyager, but for Star Trek in general. Hang on, there's an ant. Die. Sorry, I just had the bug people come by today. But I do tend to remember how those episodes made me feel. So even if I don't remember an episode specifically, I remember, a vague sort of emotional impact the episode had upon me, right? Voyager is especially true in this. Voyager and Enterprise both. Because I tend to remember both shows less than, say, TNG, for example. Because I watched TNG when it was coming out with my mom all the way through, and I was I was going through a phase, let's just call it a Trekkie phase, or a Trekker phase if you prefer, when TNG was coming out. Nowadays, it's not like I don't still consider myself a Trekker. It's just the fact that, I wasn't gaga over Star Trek when Voyager was coming out, so I wouldn't re-watch each episode like 3 times, record it on the VCR, which we happen to have, and rewatch it. So I went to get into this episode, and my memory of this episode, my emotional memory, was awkward discomfort. And I'm like, that's a really weird emotion to attach to an episode. Why would I be feeling that? I don't even know what to make of that. Okay, whatever. I guess I'll just go ahead and watch the episode. It took maybe about 2 minutes for me to remember why that is. Robert Picardo's great. His singing is great. The writing in this episode is lackluster and lacking in general. But the guest stars, oh my god. This is funny because I've been talking about this recently, both in Bab 5 and here in Voyager. The importance of both guest stars and background characters, and their significance to any given scene, and how important it is to get good people in those roles, and how useful of a tool that is as a director, as a writer, as a producer, in order to put out good quality television. This episode is the freaking opposite of that. These are some of the worst guest stars I've ever seen. I feel like the director actually walked up on the set and said, all right, guys and gals, I really want you to pretend you're an actor. You're trying to sell me on the fact that you're acting in a role. Go! I'm not even kidding. It's so bad. And I get the impression, and I got it further, more the further I got into the episode. Right towards the beginning, there's one character who speaks very slowly to the doctor because she's pretending as if the doctor's an idiot. I'll talk more about that in a minute. And yet, the further in you go into the episode, the more you notice other characters of the same species, the Komar, I believe, are talking in the same tone, in general. Now, that might have worked, except for the fact that if you're going to constantly have every line of dialogue come out like this, then maybe you should consider doing something else to try and flesh out the characters, rather than making the audience want to punch them in the face. It was bad. It was absolutely bad. Bad facial, bad general body motion, bad voice modulation and control, bad reading of the lines. In all honesty, I've worked with a lot of people who are bad actors, including myself, and yes, absolutely. I'd like to think I'm a little more experienced, especially at voice acting nowadays, because I've been doing it for many years. But I still remember when I first started. I remember being bad. And that's what I'm reminded of when I see her. I'm reminded of someone having a script in front of them and reading from it for the first time. That part is important, because when you read through a script for the first time, most people don't read ahead. They read wherever they're at with that they're reading out loud. Make sense? So they read it not knowing where the sentence is going. So the tone and the structure of the sentence does not come out audibly because they don't know what it is yet. They haven't read it yet. This felt like a first draft reading for every single one of these guest stars, especially the main guest star woman, I don't even know her name, who was the, I really hesitate to use this term, love interest for the doctor. And it killed so many of the scenes of this episode. Now, I hate to keep hashing on about this, but when in this episode, Janeway has a few scenes of some significance. Tom has like one. It was a good scene, actually. The scene between Tom and the doctor was surprisingly good, and they had surprisingly good chemistry for like the 30 seconds they had. It was weird. Janeway has a few scenes. Seven has, I think, 3 scenes. And then the doctor and the guest stars are everything else. So that means about 80 to 90% of your episode is these terrible actors. You can see why I'm harping on about it a little bit. It was a constant, just awkward discomfort. This also brings up a common Star Trek problem. Again, I've talked about this before. The race of hats. This is definitely a race of hats. In fact, this is so much a race of hats, and I don't want to get too much into this right now, but this feels like a Roddenberry race. This feels like a Roddenberry alien race, because it isn't fully thought out. I mean no offense to Roddenberry, except I kind of do. I'll talk more about Gene Roddenberry when we get to TNG. I really feel like that's the best avenue to discuss him as a person, as a creator, as a director, as a writer. But all I want to say right now is Gene Roddenberry had a great talent for coming up with a great idea and then not following through on it. A lot of times, most of what we really like about Star Trek came as a result of other people following through on his ideas. It's something I've talked about a lot recently with regards to corporate structure and creative thinking in general. I know that sounds like two things that don't have anything to do with each other, but it does, because you need someone who comes up with the ideas. This is usually referred to as the idea man. But then you need someone who can implement them. You need both. If you have people who can implement ideas, but you are a creative vacuum, you're just going to, what are you going to do? You have nothing to strike out on. You have nothing to do. And if you have idea people, but no way to implement those ideas, you get aliens like the Komar. You see where I'm going with this? Because they are not implemented well at all. In fact, they're frankly nonsensical. I'm going to quote myself here. Music is math at its most beautiful. That is a quote from me. Maybe someone else said it. Probably someone more intelligent and more famous and more generally learned than me said it. I wouldn't know. But I have said that before. Because I think it's true, absolutely. I've always thought of music as a form of math. As I've famously tend to retell the story, back when I was in high school, my music theory teacher, actually scolded me and basically downgraded me for trying to present music as math. He was actually insulted at the idea that music could be something as dirty and unemotional, like I was tainting his music with my math, He had issues. But I like to spread that tale as far and wide as possible, because screw him. But I've always thought of music as math, and the idea of an extremely mathematically talented people who don't even have a proper understanding of sentimentality, who are basically one step away from being robots. In fact, I would argue they are robots in every way. I really would. The only definition that doesn't fit for them being robots is the fact that they happen to be robots made of gushy flesh parts rather than metal parts. That's it. In every way, they seem to totally be a race of, not getting the point, not understanding nuance, not understanding subtlety. We've seen Measure of a Man, right, where Data discusses flavor of something. The writ data may be construed, but the flavor and essence of the data will be lost. That's these people in a nutshell. They are freaking robots, and a race of people who venerate math, who actually are fangasming over the Doctor, wanting to know how far he can recite pi from memory, have never even heard of the concept of music. What? I'm sorry. I know I excuse a lot of things in Star Trek. Maybe it's just the fact that I happen to be more invested in music than other things, but really? No. No. I just made a promise to myself in my head. I'm not gonna harp this part much more. I intended to. I actually have a whole small paragraph of my notes here, harping on how ridiculous and stupid that is, and how poorly realized of an idea it is. Let's just leave it as it is. Let's instead take it for what it is. These are a race of people who are so casual that the idea of just completely randomly reprogramming the Doctor and removing his ability to speak without his permission, without the permission of the ship. Remember, they view him as property at this point in time. And actually, they never stop viewing him as property. That's the funny part. So they view him as property. So they have no problem whatsoever basically breaking into someone else's house and rearranging their stuff to suit their purposes, right? People who have offered to help them, I feel like pointing out. That is the level of arrogance and condescension these people have, okay? These people, these people who venerate math suddenly encounter singing and fixate on it to the point of ludicrousness. As you guys probably know, I tend to reach out to behind-the-scenes stuff with every episode I do, with everything I do, actually. I don't catch everything. Several times people have pointed out mistakes I've made or given me information that I did not know. Very recently, a Babylon 5 episode went live, and apparently the nuclear bombs in San Diego were caused by some terrorist attack in some date or other, whatever, which I wasn't actually aware of, just to give you an example of what I'm talking about. So it's not like I am perfect. But I do try to reach out, and I found very little about this episode, except for one interview. And it was about the idea of what would it be like to have an episode centered around a Star Trek fan. Seeing their perspective of things. I will, in the interest of 100% honesty, I don't know if that was referring to this episode or not. But it was referring to Voyager, And off the top of my head, I'm not sure which other episode it could have been referring to. And it was mentioned, it was being referenced by someone else in context of this episode. They actually have a line in here. Where is it? I actually wrote it down. Where is it? I swear I wrote it down. Maybe I didn't. Maybe it was just so obvious I didn't write it down. There's a point of this episode where, they discuss what fans are. Oh, that's right. It's the seven. It's the seven scene. Yep, there it is, right there. They have jabs. They take small little jabs at how fans can get a little bit fanatical about what it is they are fans of, and how maybe they're just interested in the person, or maybe they're interested in what their favorite food is, or we're friends of the Doctor, and so we're we're lauded and put on a pedestal by so many people because we happen to be friends of the Doctor. And there's a lot of little subtle dialogue bits in here that, in my opinion, were clearly aimed at fan bases. Maybe not Star Trek fan bases in particular, but definitely fan bases in general. And I just found myself kind of tilting my head at that, like, really? Because I feel like that was the pitch for this episode. I mean this sincerely. A bunch of Star Trek fans become fanboys for the Doctor. That is this episode in a nutshell. And yet there is one actual thing that saved this episode. But I don't want to get into that just yet. Let's talk about the other thing first. Haven't we done this story before? I don't mean the fanboy thing. The Doctor is a real person and not just a piece of machinery and blah, 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 blah. We've done this story before. In fact, we here on this show have done a show about how they've already done this show before. We're getting too deep. Oh my God. We're falling into the freaking matrix of stupidity here. We've done this before. We've done this before, for God's sakes. Why are we still doing this? This is like the Doctor has basically completed his initial character arc and started to work on his second one. I've actually talked about that. Same with Seven. Same with most of the characters actually have completed most of their initial character arcs. Why is the Doctor suddenly just lunging back like several years worth of character progression just for this episode? He is willing to resign his post and delete all his medical data in this episode. Really? He is willing to abandon his friends, and he flat out admits that he cares about these people, and he shows it. Again, I mentioned the scene where he interacted with Tom Paris. Surprisingly powerful chemistry between those two actors in that scene. It's one of those, I don't need to tell you how much I care about you kind of moments. It's something that Bashir and O'Brien did a lot very well over on DS9. That kind of a thing, just, I really do not hate you, that kind of a thing. And then the scene with Seven, where Seven is clearly upset and clearly hurt over the fact that apparently whatever consideration and friendship that she has with him doesn't matter to him. And she's basically for the first time feeling that kind of rejection and failure and the emotional impact of what it's like to lose a friend, which is something that is a part of humanity. It's a part of characterization. It's a part of how we grow emotionally. It's a part of how we understand loss and significance. And this is her first time going through that. And yet for all of these impacting moments and all this significance and all of this being presented here, the Doc is willing to drop everything at the drop of a hat for a bunch of people who are fangasming over him. That's insulting. That's insulting of the viewers by thinking that we actually think he would be capable of this, and it's insulting of the character. We know the Doctor has an ego, but is the Doctor's ego so wildly, rampantly out of control that he would drop everything at a chance to be put on a pedestal? I don't buy it. A few years ago, yeah, absolutely. Season 6, we're past that. We're past that by this point in time. I don't even know where to go to that. He even pulls the race card in this episode. I've mentioned this before. He'll be doing this a lot. In basically every episode he's in from now on, he'll be pulling the hologram race card. He's just flesh and blood as well. Shouldn't I have the same rights as the rest of the crew? Yeah. And the funny thing is, Janeway pretty much puts that right onto him. It's like, yes, you absolutely have the rights of the rest of the crew. But you're still being an idiot. I would have given this show so much more credit if Janeway had just said, you're being an idiot. That would have been awesome. Now, I want to mention one other thing here really quick. The Doctor completely oversteps his bounds with regards to security on the ship. Let me make my point clear here. If Voyager wanted to open up the ship to these people for diplomatic relations, that's cool. In fact, that's kind of awesome of a thing to be done. It's something they've done before, and they've had security problems as a result of doing that. That was not even a few episodes ago, really. With the episode, I can't remember the name of it. It was the Big 7 episode right at the beginning of Season 6. Good episode. And yet, that's not what happens in this episode. The Doctor unilaterally decides to go ahead and just beam brilliance of these people up to feed his own ego, making a huge security risk, in addition to literally disrupting normal ship operations, in order that people can go and get his autograph, basically. I don't even have words to explain how stupid that is. And it's completely over bounds. It's completely over the line in every way. From a personal level, it shows a complete lack of respect for other people's time and space. On a professional level, it shows a complete lack of everything. I'm just going to put it bluntly. Respect, discipline, protocol, actual decency, logic, sense-making, with regards to the operation of the ship that he is serving on. The point is made later on that, it's not the fact that you are a hologram, which is why you can't do this. It's the fact that you're the freaking Doctor that is why you can't do this. I agree. I mean, granted, this is something Picard and Riker always hit a really good balance point on. Forgive me for segueing for a moment. They treated their crew like they were family. They had the softer touch. They cared about their people, and they wanted to engineer a warm environment of trust and mutual respect. Okay? From Season 2 onwards, because Season 1 Picard was just a dick. But it's true, though, right? You know what I'm talking about, right? So that kind of environment is important, and yet the ships, that has to have a limit. You know what I mean? You can't spare the rod all the time. Sometimes you do have to crack it. Sometimes you do have to say, you still have to do your job, because we're still on a ship which will be in dangerous situations and still has a job to do, right? And that's my point. That's why I say the Doctor has completely crossed the line personally and professionally here. He has abused the trust that was put into him for allowing this to happen to begin with. Try to remember something, by the way, and this is where a previous point ties in. These people thought nothing of casually reprogramming someone else's thing to better suit them on a ship that had offered to help them. That is the level of callous, uncaring, lack of sentimentality robots that these people are. People like that, I'm just going to say it bluntly, are a threat. They're not a threat because of malice. They're not a threat because of malevolence or because of anger or any other usual things that you would associate with such a thing. They are a threat because they just don't care. It doesn't mean anything to them to inconvenience or hurt you, to change you to better suit them. That's just logical to them. Randomly allowing all those people on this ship is a huge danger. And the Doctor should have known that. He was present and had to shoo them away from reprogramming him while he was standing there treating them. And all of this comes full circle. And this is the one thread that salvages this episode at all. The Doctor does have a character arc in this episode. If we ignore all the rest of Voyager, he does have a character arc here. And I'm not talking about the ego thing. I'm not talking about the humility thing. I'm talking about the realization that he is better than them. Because they're still robots, and he has evolved past that. He understands nuance, subtlety, inflection, flavor, sentimentality. I've been using these words this whole video so far. He understands some of the finer, grayed out, harder to define things, the things you can't really mathematically lay out, the things you can't really put a hard formula on and say A, X, B, plus 3, etc., right? He understands that. He has grown to learn that over his 6 years, and that's great. They have not. These people think nothing of reprogramming him any more than they think nothing of replacing him with a superior model, whose only purpose is to serve them in the capacity they require. And after all, and she says it flat out to him, the cultural enrichment of our people is mathematically more important than your puny little ship and their survival. Because he's their doctor. She doesn't say it as... She doesn't literally say, if they all died of gangrene or sickness, it is worth less than our people. But it is heavily implied, especially because of that callous nature of them. This is why I say this race could have been realized better. If they just had a little working, a little tinkering, you could have had a race of cold, callous monsters. The worst kind of monsters. The monsters who mean you no ill will. The monsters who don't want to hurt you. The monsters who don't care about you at all. Who barely even recognize you as being there. As being worthy of acknowledgement. As being worthy of being recognized. And certainly below their respect. Last point. I really hate to point this out, though. But here it is. Because I feel like that is the one strength of this episode. And yet they just couldn't leave it alone, could they? They had to shoe in Seven learns a lesson about humanity. I told you, we're going to point it out every time it happens. And it happens in this one, too. Seven learns a lesson about humanity, because she actually learns 2 lessons about humanity. Although, it does kind of tie into the theme of the work, that Seven understands that there is more than just the mathematical base need of existence, but that there is a layer of gray above that. Because at the beginning, she talks about this fan mail and how it's irrelevant, and she's very stupid. I'm just going to put it bluntly. And that's your typical Seven learns a lesson about humanity. Janeway has to preach to Seven about humanity and how humanity is awesome, blah, 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 blah. You know, that's that whole fan mail scene that I already ranted about. But then at the end, she gives one last piece of fan mail to the Doctor, saying, you know, I have always respected you and your talents, and I still would consider myself your friend. Things that have no literal value. They only have perceived value. Showing through action that she understands what he has also understood because he has imparted that onto her. That the two of them, for all their insignificance and all their mathematical lacking and their inferior technology and blah, 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 are better people than the Kamar are. Or the Komar. Kamar? I've actually forgotten their name. Than the idiot robot people are. And again, this would have fit beautifully if the villains, I'm just going to call them that, because they basically are the bad guys of the week, if they had been better realized. I think this would have really helped to snap together that whole theme of sentimentality. But alas, that's all I got today for you guys. I'm going to go to bed. I really am. I've already taken my night pills. I'm about to collapse onto my bed right now, so I'll see you guys.